Hello, this is intended to be an overview of the entire process of an initial assessment. A lot of times, especially if you're new with us, you want to see how all these pieces kind of fit together. So this is going to give you that sense of how all this fits together. So I have a patient that's in my VC waiting room. That's the little ding that you hear. But before we get to that, I want to go over just the whole process of opening the note. So first off, you'll see that patient is on my dashboard. If you don't see a dashboard or anything over here like this on your setup, you're going to want to let somebody know. You're going to always want to open the patient note from the dashboard, because then it lets everything happen from the proper connection to the note and back-end logistics kind of stuff. So to do that, you just double click on the appointment. When you double click on the appointment, it's going to bring up a note associated with the type of appointment. This particular patient is a test patient that I've used that has not had any notes on the chart since August of 2021. So this patient would qualify for an initial assessment. So you see back here on the dashboard, he was scheduled as a teletherapy initial assessment adult. So when we go to the note, you'll see very quickly and easily that this note is a mental health template type, and it's an initial therapy adult. One of the first things that I do when I have a new patient is I come here to the subnote and I go to the mental health side of things, and I bring in any inventories that were there, like a PHQ-9. And I also bring in any inventories that were there, like a GAD-7. And then the other standard that we have will be the CAGE age. So I'll bring that. Those are typically given to patients upon admission. And you'll see that this would have been done for this patient a long time ago. So this lets me know this is something I'm probably going to need to do with this patient in session. So that ding that you hear is my VC waiting room telling me that view only is there. This is the patient's name, view only. You want to make sure that when you get a patient signing into your room, that they actually match the name that's on file. If this were an entirely different patient, this would be a great time to reach out to my admin to be able to say, hey, something's up here. This is going to keep dinging until I either start the appointment or I hit this little dismiss button. And you'll see when I bring view only up, every once in a while, VC, it takes a minute sometimes, it gives me their information. This is the city, this is the address, the city, the state, and the zip code. And because this person has not given me information like that, that's going to be something I want to verify very quickly. So I'm going to come here to this little button that says, call, and I'm going to start the session with the patient. And that's what it's going to look like here. This is my session. I got to get my lights on. There's my patient, Mr. Lego Man. So because I'm working in a one screen setup, one of the first things I'm going to do just from a logistics standpoint is I'm going to pop this patient out. I'm going to get them really small. I'm going to move them right to my camera, and I'm going to hit the pin always on top button. I'm going to move me to another spot. I'll minimize this screen so I can still see Advanced MD in the background. And then I've got the session ready to go and starting with the patient. So starting off first, I'm going to want to make sure, yes, this patient is present. I'm going to be asking questions about consent, making sure that they know that this is the telehealth session, verify the consents, the limits of my confidentiality. If the patient agrees, then great, especially if I'm only getting verbal consent, I'll need to come down here. I'll press the period and a V, and there will be a thing that says verbal consent obtained to treatment. Patient couldn't sign for treatment today due to no internet access, we'll say. And I will instruct him to come back into the office or to get internet access to be able to get the written consent signed before the next session. Since this patient did not give me an address in VC, I'm going to go to the diagnosis tab, and I'm going to real quick click on telehealth, and I'm going to ask them to verify their address. And they are indeed at 10125 West Colonial, Suite 212. They're at my neighbor's office next door. So I'll have that information there, and this is individual therapy. So as I go through the note, you'll see in the HPI session, I've already documented that there's verbal consent obtained. And I'm going to want to get into the actual reason why the patient is here. Historically, this is I can't sleep, my grades are slipping. At this point, His chief complaint might be different in the sense of, man, maybe he's having relationship problems. And I'll enter in whatever that chief complaint is, and I'm going to try to figure out what's going on with this patient. And so, in order to do that, I'm going to need to be able to get some diagnostic information from him. Now, there's a subtle balance between just getting a whole bunch of information and at the same time being able to develop some rapport with the patient. But one of the easiest ways to be able to get that diagnostic information is to use the DOT extensions. So let's say I want to run a depression inventory with this patient. And I'm going to hit the period. And if I hit the letter D, it kind of narrows this list down. And I'm going to get this sense of saying, hey, what are the depression symptoms? And as we go through, we'll start to see that there are some symptoms here of depression. There's been some dysphoria. He hasn't been able to enjoy a lot of activities. He certainly had some insomnia. And I'm going to make a note here that, difficulty, let's see, too much, does not feel rested. There hadn't been any weight loss or weight gain. There is a lot of fatigue and loss of energy. It's been having a lot of feelings of guilt and self-worth. And there's been some reoccurrent thoughts of death. So I'm going to count these up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 symptoms of depression that's here. And then those situations that there's, what's the duration of this current episode is about 6 weeks. Severity of symptoms based upon what we're talking about, we're going to say this is moderate. And one of the ways that we'll know whether this is moderate or not is we'll come over here to the subnote where we entered in the PHQ-9, and we might come back and question these things like, hey, I've had little interest or pleasure doing things more than half the days. I'm feeling down and depressed, hopeless several days. Nearly every day there's sleep problems. Nearly every day there's energy issues. Poor appetite and overeating, that's several days. Feeling bad about yourself, that's several days. Trouble concentrating on things, reading the newspapers, more than half. And speaking slowly, that's really not at all. And then there's several days, there's thoughts of suicide. So when I click the summation button, it's telling me there's 14. And so he's right in the middle of the scale of moderate. So I'll come back here and I'll be able to real quickly be able to figure out that, yes, symptoms are moderate. What makes things better is, fun activities. What makes things worse. I'm sorry, I wrote that wrong. Makes things worse. Arguing with partner. Makes things better. Fun activities. There have been previous depressive episodes, yes, and then there has not been previous symptoms of mania. I would need to obviously check that. And because this patient had a historic diagnosis of anxiety, I'm going to also come here and do an anxiety inventory, I would go .A, I would get anxiety, and we try to figure out what these symptoms are. Yes, there's been some irritability. There have been some sleep disturbances here, but more than likely those are more centered around depression at this point because there's only 2. Duration of current symptoms, we're still in that 6-week mindset. Severity of symptoms is mild. This can also be tested here under the GAD-7. If we come to, he's not feeling anxious or worry. There are several days he has worry issues. He's not worrying too much about different things. He's really only worrying about one thing, his relationship. There are some days he has trouble relaxing. He's not really having restlessness issues. He is becoming easily annoyed or irritable. And there are some days that that's going to happen. So we'll resum this, and that will give us an answer of 5. 0 to 5 tells us that there's mild anxiety, and it's not very difficult at all for him to be able to do things as a result of anxiety. So that's an example of how we might address those 2 things. Depending on what we find, we might get other stuff going on, other things happening. In an initial assessment, we would come here to the PFSH section, the past medical, psychiatric, family, and social history. And a lot of this has been filled out already because the patient has filled things out and this patient has already had an assessment. But we would need to reassess to figure out, have there been any prior suicidal or homicidal attempts or ideations? Is there any cutting or self-harm happening? Is the patient facing any legal issues? If it was yes, then we might say, hey, he had um, uh, uh, had a parking ticket, which is not really but it's included in this, just in the sense that this might be something that we want to explore later. We'd go over his psychosocial history, his cultural ethics, type of beliefs, current living situations. Everything that's in yellow has to be filled out. Everything that's in white, the more information you can get, the better. And it's not so much that you have to sit down and ask every single question. Sometimes you get this information during the course of just the conversations that you would have with people. This was not current. This was in past use. That's something that's there. And let's say that maybe in the past he has tried some prescription stimulants, but he hasn't done anything in the last 30 days. He does endorse marijuana uses 2 to 3 times a week, and from a nicotine standpoint, it's a non-smoker. Education history: he's still a student at UCF. He's been with Starbucks now for 3 years. And he's held the same position for the past 5 years. Stressors at this point, his schedule's gotten more stable, but maybe his relationship is a current stressor, and there's no military experience. We come here to the MSC tab. If the patient has not made suicidal ideations, we would deny that. So when we ask if the patient does deny, we need to fill out the mental status exam. So let's say that today he is depressed. The affect, based upon what we are seeing, even though he's really smiling in this example from my Lego man, I don't have a depressed Lego man. So we're just going to say that that's full and appropriate. We'll go through and we'll enter in all of our various information here in the mental status exam. We'll come to the diagnosis tab. He had a historic diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, but that's not present today. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to come here to the ICD. I'm going to say pick from list. I will come down here under major depressive disorder, and I will select him as major depressive single episode moderate because of the severity of things. I'll need to copy this to this box up top. I'm also going to hit save to load this as you can see what it says. It's saving this as a problem list. I'm going to save this as a problem list. This is a telehealth visit. Let's just say we started at 9 a.m. and we're going to end this at 9:55 a.m. That's a total time of 55 minutes. This is a 90791T telehealth psychiatric diagnostic examination. There was no interactive complexity. I'm going to need to come here and fill out a treatment plan. This particular patient already has one for depression. We're going to say that this is acute at this point. The severity of this is moderate. He has some mild impaired relationship functioning. So we're talking about this plan still looks pretty good. Here's some objectives that we can follow. We're going to work through this for the next 6 months with this patient. But since he had this in an outpatient program previously, we're going to delete the intensive outpatient program. It might be a good idea to refer him to med management. We'll talk about that in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and remove anxiety from this treatment plan because moving forward under this assessment, the patient does not need anxiety to be a part of this particular treatment plan. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to delete all of these guys here. And we're going to then sign this note. So we'll come here to sign. I'll click on the sign button. It's going to run a test and it's going to say, hey, note can't be signed here because I've missed something. So it's telling me that supervisory protocol is missed. So I'm going to come back to the diagnosis tab and I'm going to select this button at the top that says I was not providing services under a supervisory protocol. And then I'm going to click sign and it's going to hopefully let me sign the note. So I'm going to enter my sign off on this note. And if my settings are correct, what should happen next is it should auto-populate a charge slip for this patient. And you'll see that the charge slip comes up. Over in this corner is where the CPT code is entered, and then this is the diagnostic code that we entered on the other side. If I ever need to change this or that doesn't pop up because I haven't entered something correctly, I can click on this tab. I can come down and select the appropriate CPT code associated with me, and then I can also select either from the chart, which is where I normally do things, which is here, or if I need to select from a list, I can select the list and select the appropriate diagnosis. So then I'm going to sign this note like I would any other note. But before I sign that, we need to make a referral for this patient. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to go to this section that says orders. I'm going to click the plus sign. I'm going to open up a new order. I'm going to need to enter in my facility here, which is going to be Ocoee. I'm going to go to the test tab. I'm going to go down here to referrals. I'm going to select this button that says RX medication evaluation. And in the diagnosis, I'm going to click here. I'm going to pick from chart, and I'm going to say this patient has depressed mood. And then I would sign this. I'm not going to sign this particular one because it's an example, but you sign this the exact same way that you would any other chart note. I would hit sign, and then I would enter in my password here and click sign. But since this is an example, I'm not going to hit that. But I'll come back to the telehealth section of the charge slip, and when I hit sign, and it's telling me that the slip can't be signed because this is set for a future date, which is you're not going to see because I've had to set this patient pretty far in the future to make sure you don't see other patients from a PHI standpoint. But you would hit sign and sign this like any other chart note. And then at that point, it might ask you, do you want to save this particular problem list to the session? If you want to, you can click OK, or to the chart, you can click OK, or you can click cancel. And then it's going to close out the note and you are completed your first visit with this patient. So I hope this helps, and good luck with it.